Amahle was the kind of woman people in Lusaka admired. To her neighbors, she was the perfect wife, graceful, respectful, always smiling. Friends envied her life, thinking she had everything: a successful husband, a beautiful home, and the kind of marriage many prayed for. But what no one saw were the scars she carried inside, the silent pain she hid behind her gentle eyes. In truth, Amahle was more than just a wife standing in her husband's shadow. She was the very reason Taye's business existed. When they first started, it was Amahle who worked late into the night, drawing up plans, finding clients, and managing every little detail. She poured her heart and soul into building something from nothing. But as the company grew, Taye slowly erased her from the story. To the outside world, he was the mastermind, the visionary, the man who had it all figured out. Amahle became invisible, just the supportive wife who clapped from the sideline. At home, her devotion was met with indifference. Taye spoke to her as though she were a burden, someone who should be grateful to simply stand beside him. Yet Amahle never complained. She told herself that patience was her strength, that if she endured long enough, her husband would see her worth. She believed that love could be won through loyalty, sacrifice, and silence. But fate was preparing to test her in ways she never imagined. And the quiet woman everyone overlooked was about to discover just how much fire lived within her. It was late in the evening when Amahle moved quietly through the house with a tray of tea. She always made sure Taye had his tea before bed, a small ritual of care she never abandoned no matter how cold he had become toward her. The house was unusually silent, except for the low hum of his voice coming from the study. The door was slightly open, and as she approached, she heard him speaking softly, almost tenderly, but not to her. Amahle froze. At first, she thought it was just another business call. But then the words sank in, sharp as knives. By this weekend she'll be gone. I'll make sure her shares are transferred. Then, my love, you'll have everything. This house, the business, the life she thinks is hers. It will all be ours. The tray shook in Amahle's hands. Her knees felt weak, but she pressed herself against the wall, listening, her heart pounding so loudly she feared he would hear it through the door. Taye's tone was sweet, almost desperate, the kind of tenderness he had never given her. And then came the final blow. Don't worry, Naledi. Soon you'll be the queen of this home. She'll be nothing. Amahle's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a plan to erase her completely. The man she had built her life around, the man whose empire she had built with her own sweat and sleepless nights, was plotting to strip her of everything. Not only her marriage, but the company she gave her youth to, the home she filled with love, even her dignity. For a moment, her body trembled. Her heart cracked under the weight of his words. She could almost hear it shatter, pieces of her trust breaking into dust. A hot wave of pain surged through her chest, and her first instinct was to collapse, to cry, to scream out his name and demand answers. But she didn't. Instead, something else rose inside her. A spark, a flame she never knew she carried. It burned quietly at first, warming the cracks of her broken heart, then spread like wildfire. The tears she expected never came. Her hands stopped shaking, her breathing steadied, and in that silence, Amahle felt a new power take root in her soul. She set the tray down gently on the hallway table, straightened her back, and wiped her palms against her dress. For years, she had believed patience was her weapon, that silence would one day win her love. But now she understood. Her silence had been mistaken for weakness. And Taye was about to learn just how dangerous it was to underestimate. Amahle turned and walked away from the door without a sound. The tea grew cold on the tray, forgotten. In her heart, a vow was made. If Taye thought she was weak, then he would see what true strength looked like. And this time, she would not be the one left broken. Naledi arrived in Lusaka like a storm, loud, dazzling, impossible to ignore. She was everything society loved to admire. Tall, stunning, with skin that glowed and laughter that filled every room. People whispered about her expensive dresses flown in from Johannesburg, her designer shoes, the way she carried herself like the world belonged to her. And in a way, it did. She had mastered the art of turning heads, of making women feel small and men feel powerful just by the flick of her smile. To many, she was glamorous. To Amahle, she was poison wrapped in perfume. Naledi knew exactly who Amahle was, yet whenever they crossed paths at business dinners or social events, she played her part with cruel precision. She would lean in close to other women, whispering comments about Amahle's plain style or the way she seemed too old-fashioned for a man like Taye. Her laughter was sharp, designed to slice. Sometimes she wouldn't even bother with whispers. She would simply give Amahle a lingering, mocking smile that said, "I've already taken what matters to you." Taye, blinded by his obsession, fed Naledi's arrogance. He promised her everything, his business, his home, his life. To him, Amahle was just an obstacle that needed to be moved aside, while Naledi was the prize he wanted to flaunt. "By the weekend, she'll be gone," Amahle overheard him say more than once. Those words, once crushing, now echoed in her mind like a challenge. At gatherings, Amahle played her role with the same grace she had always shown. She smiled, greeted guests, poured drinks, and stood by her husband's side as though nothing had changed. Yet beneath her calm face, a storm raged. Every laugh from Naledi, every careless display of affection from Taye, only fueled the fire that was growing inside her. She learned to wear her silence like armor, letting her enemies think she was too blind, too timid, too naive to notice. Naledi mistook Amahle's quietness for defeat. She thought the wife was weak, a shadow already fading into the background. What she didn't see was the steel being forged behind those patient eyes. Amahle was watching, listening, calculating. Every insult Naledi threw, every boast Taye made, every whisper about Amahle's failing role as a wife was another stone added to the fortress she was secretly building within herself. People admired Naledi's boldness, but deep down, some also questioned her. There was something too sharp about her smile, too practiced about her charm. And when she openly mocked Amahle, a few guests shifted uncomfortably, though no one dared to speak against her. After all, Taye himself encouraged her, laughing at Amahle's expense as though betrayal were entertainment. Amahle stood through it all, her back straight, her smile calm, her eyes steady. But inside, she whispered to herself, "Laugh while you can, Naledi, because when the storm breaks, you won't be the one standing tall." Amahle had always been quiet, but now her silence carried purpose. Every move she made was careful, deliberate, and hidden behind her calm smile. While Taye and Naledi laughed loudly in public, planning her downfall, Amahle was building something far stronger in secret. She knew tears would not save her. Only truth, strategy, and patience would. The first step was to visit a man she had not spoken to in years, the lawyer who had once believed in her vision. Back when Taye and Amahle were just starting the company, it was Amahle who insisted they put the papers in proper order. She remembered sitting in the lawyer's small office, explaining every detail while Taye dismissed it as unnecessary. That moment, so long ago, was about to become her shield. When she walked into the lawyer's office now, he looked up in surprise. "Amahle, it's been years." She smiled politely, but there was steel in her eyes. She explained what had been happening, and together they reviewed the company record. And there it was, tucked safely away in the legal language Taye had never cared to read. Amahle still held controlling shares. She was not the shadow he believed her to be. She was the true backbone of the empire. Next came the evidence. Amahle was not reckless. She did not storm into her husband's study or confront him in anger. Instead, she waited, listening quietly when he spoke carelessly on the phone, his voice dripping with promises to Naledi. Each word was a dagger, but she forced herself to stay steady. With trembling hands, she began recording. She saved every call, every detail of his betrayal, making copies and storing them where even fire could not touch them. At night, when the house was quiet, Amahle sat at her desk with the recordings in front of her. She replayed his voice over and over, not to hurt herself, but to remind herself of the truth. This was not the man she had once loved. This was someone who had taken her devotion for granted and thought her silence meant surrender. Each recording became another weapon in her growing arsenal. Her plan took shape slowly, like a puzzle coming together. She would not rush. She would not give Taye the satisfaction of seeing her break. Instead, she would wait for the perfect moment, the moment when the truth would not just sting him, but expose him before the very people he wanted to impress. Amahle carried herself as if nothing had changed. She still greeted guests politely, still served Taye his tea, still smiled when people praised him. But inside, she was sharper than a blade. She was preparing for war, not with anger, but with precision. And though no one around her could see it yet, Amahle was no longer the silent wife they thought she was. She was a woman gathering the weapons of truth, ready to strike when the time was right. The invitation went out as if it were the grandest celebration of the year. Taye told everyone it was a dinner to honor the company's success, a night of joy, laughter, and new beginning. Family, friends, and business partners arrived dressed in their finest, curious and excited. But beneath all the sparkle and chatter, Taye had a hidden agenda. This was not just a celebration, it was a trap. His plan was cruel and precise. To embarrass Amahle in front of everyone, strip her of dignity, and then introduce Naledi as his new partner, both in business and in life. Amahle knew all of this. She had overheard, she had seen the signs, she had pieced the puzzle together long before this night. But instead of trembling with fear, she prepared with grace. When the evening came, she walked into the grand dining hall like a queen stepping onto her throne. Her gown flowed like liquid gold, her head held high, her presence commanding every eye in the room. The whispers started instantly. People noticed something different about her. This was not the quiet, overlooked wife they were used to. Tonight, she carried herself with power. Taye, seated at the head of the table, forced a smile when she entered. For a moment, he was caught off guard. He had expected her to look fragile, maybe even broken. Instead, Amahle looked radiant, untouchable. But arrogance kept him steady. In his mind, no amount of beauty or grace could stop what he had planned. The dinner began with laughter, glasses clinking, and speeches about success. Naledi, seated boldly beside Taye, glowed under the attention, whispering sharp remarks that made Amahle the silent joke of the evening. But Amahle did not flinch. She smiled politely, her calmness unsettling those who watched closely. As the meal ended, Taye rose to his feet, glass in hand. His voice rang out with confidence. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate not only the growth of our company but also the exciting future ahead. Change is necessary for progress, and I am ready to take the next step in both business and life." The room quieted. All eyes turned toward him. Naledi's lips curved into a victorious smile, ready for her moment. Amahle sat still, her eyes fixed on her husband, her face serene. Inside, her heart beat with steady fire. She knew what was coming, but unlike everyone else in the room, she also knew what she carried in her hand: the truth, the power, the final word. There was something in the air that no one could quite name. A heaviness, a tension. Guests shifted in their seats, sensing the night was about to take a turn. And though Taye believed he was the one in control, the truth was simple. The stage he had set for Amahle's humiliation was about to become the very place where he destroyed himself. Amahle lifted her glass slowly, her calm smile never fading. The storm was ready to break. Taye stood tall at the head of the table, his glass raised high, his smile wide with pride. He believed the night was his. "To new beginnings," he declared, his voice ringing with triumph. "To success, and to the woman who will stand by my side as we take this empire even higher." His hand reached toward Naledi, whose face glowed with victory. Guests gasped softly, whispers rippling through the room as they realized what he was about to do. But before his glass touched hers, Amahle's calm voice cut through the noise. "Not so fast, Taye." The room froze. All eyes turned toward her. Amahle rose gracefully from her seat, her gown shimmering under the chandelier light. She did not raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her quiet confidence was louder than any shout. With steady hands, she pulled a folder from her clutch and placed it on the table in front of him. "I think our guests should know the truth before you continue your toast," she said. Confusion swept across Taye's face, followed quickly by annoyance. "Amahle, sit down," he snapped, trying to laugh it off. But the laughter in the room had already died. Curiosity now filled the air. Amahle opened the folder, her fingers moving slowly, deliberately. "These," she said, holding up signed documents, "are the original company papers. Papers you never cared to read when I insisted on registering everything properly. And as they clearly show, I am not just your wife standing on the sideline. I am the rightful majority owner of this company." The room erupted. Gasps echoed like thunder. Chairs scraped against the floor as guests leaned forward, eager to see. Taye's smile collapsed into shock, his hand frozen midair, his glass trembling. Naledi's face drained of color. "That's impossible," Taye muttered, his voice low panic. Amahle's calm never wavered. "What's impossible," she said softly, "is how easily you underestimated." Naledi tried to recover, her sharp tongue ready to twist the moment in her favor. "These are lies. She's desperate, can't you see?" Before she could finish, Amahle reached into her bag once more. She pulled out a small device, pressed a button, and suddenly the room filled with Taye's own voice. The recordings played loud and clear. His laughter, his promises, his betrayal. "By this weekend she'll be gone. The company, the house, everything will be ours, Naledi." The words cut through the air like knives. Guests covered their mouths in shock. Some turned away in disgust. Naledi's face crumbled, her confidence melting into shame. Taye stood frozen, his eyes darting wildly as though searching for an escape. Amahle let the silence hang heavy after the last word faded. She looked at them both, her eyes steady, her voice calm. "You thought I was weak because I was silent. But tonight, I choose to speak." No one in the room dared move. The empire Taye thought he controlled had shifted in a single moment, and Amahle held it firmly in her hands. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the faint hum of the recordings replaying in everyone's mind. Naledi, who had walked into the dinner with her chin high and her smile sharp, now sat frozen in her chair. The color had drained from her face, and her perfectly painted lips trembled. The confidence she wore like a jeweled crown slipped away, piece by piece, until nothing was left but fear. Guests who had once admired her boldness now looked at her with disgust. Some whispered behind their hands, others simply shook their heads. A few women exchanged glances that carried a silent message. So this is the woman who thought she could steal another's home. The admiration Naledi had enjoyed for so long turned into pity and scorn within seconds. Taye tried to recover, forcing a weak laugh. This isn't what it looks like," he stammered, but his voice lacked the authority it once held. His business partners, men who had always clapped him on the back and praised his success, now shifted away from him. Their eyes turned to Amahle with a new kind of respect. They saw in her not just a wife, but the true force behind the company, the woman who had quietly built what Taye had claimed as his own. One partner, an older man with silver hair, rose to his feet and bowed his head slightly to Amahle. "We had no idea," he said softly, the respect in his voice unmistakable. Others followed, offering nods, handshakes, and quiet words of admiration. Taye's face darkened as he realized the power was slipping through his fingers, flowing toward the very woman he had tried to erase. Naledi tried to speak, her voice breaking. "This isn't fair. She's twisting everything." But the words died in her throat when Amahle finally turned to her. Amahle's eyes were calm, steady, almost pitying. She leaned forward just slightly, her voice carrying through the hall like ice. "While you plotted to take my crown, remember, I built the throne." The line cut through Naledi's last fragments of pride. Gasps filled the room. Some guests even applauded softly, not because it was entertainment, but because the truth had been delivered with such grace and power. Naledi's shoulders slumped, her chin dropped, and she lowered her gaze, unable to meet anyone's eye. The glittering queen she had pretended to be was gone, replaced by a woman exposed and disgraced. Taye's hand twitched as though he wanted to reach for her, but even he knew it was useless. His empire, his reputation, and his mistress had all crumbled in the span of minutes. Amahle did not gloat. She did not shout. She simply sat back, her dignity intact, her power undeniable. The woman who had been silent for years now stood taller than them all. And as the guests began to whisper her name with reverence, one truth became clear. The crown had always belonged to her. The dinner ended with whispers, gasps, and silence that clung to every corner of the room. But for Amahle, it was only the beginning. She had shown the truth, yes, but she wasn't done. Words alone were not enough. She wanted to make sure that by morning, Taye would understand that the empire he tried to steal was no longer his to touch. That night, while the guests went home buzzing with the story of his disgrace, Amahle was already in action. She met with her lawyer, the same one who had helped her years ago, and signed the papers that shifted her quiet ownership into undeniable control. By dawn, the company's accounts were frozen under her authority. Every cent Taye thought was his was suddenly locked, untouchable. Employees were informed of the change. Partners were notified. The empire had a new leader, and it was the woman Taye had once dismissed as just a wife. Amahle didn't stop there. She filed for divorce the same morning, her hands steady as she signed her name. For years, she had endured humiliation in silence, but now she walked away on her own term. No begging, no bargaining, no looking back. The marriage he thought she would cling to was already over. When Taye finally stumbled back to the mansion, still reeling from the night before, he was met with a sight he could never have imagined. His clothes, his shoes, his prized suits, even the gold watch he flaunted at parties, all of it was thrown out onto the driveway. The grand gates, once a symbol of his success, were closed against him. He was no longer welcome in the home that Amahle had turned into a sanctuary with her love and effort. Neighbors watched quietly from their windows as Taye stood in shock, staring at his life scattered in piles. Some shook their heads. Others whispered that it was justice. The same man who had tried to humiliate his wife in front of the world was now the one humiliated, standing on the outside with nothing but the broken pieces of his pride. Inside the house, Amahle walked through the rooms with calm steps. The silence felt different now, not heavy with sorrow, but filled with strength. She had taken back her life in a single night. The same evening Taye had chosen to destroy her, she had destroyed him instead, not with rage but with truth, law, and undeniable power. As the sun rose over Lusaka, Amahle stood at her window, watching the light spill across the city. Her heart was no longer chained to a man who had betrayed her. She had her freedom, her company, and her dignity. And Taye, once so sure of his control, was left standing outside the gates of the empire she had built, locked out forever. Amahle did not waste time mourning what she had lost. Instead, she poured her energy into building something even greater. The company that had once carried Taye's name now stood proudly under her. For the first time, the world saw the truth. It was Amahle who had carried the vision, Amahle who had built the foundation, Amahle who had the strength to lead. She stepped into her role with confidence, not as a silent partner, but as the rightful head of the empire. But Amahle's dream stretched beyond profits and boardroom. She wanted her story to mean something. She knew what it felt like to be dismissed, betrayed, and silenced, and she refused to let other women suffer in the shadows the way she had. She opened doors within her company for women who had been abandoned, cheated, or treated as if they were less. She gave them jobs, training, and most importantly, dignity. Each woman she employed carried her own story of pain, but together they found strength in building something new. The office soon became more than just a workplace. It became a symbol of empowerment. Women walked in with broken hearts, but walked out with lifted heads, reminded that betrayal was not the end of their story. Amahle often told them, We are not defined by what was done to us. We are defined by what we choose to become after. Her words spread like fire, giving hope to countless women across Zambia. The media quickly took notice. Newspapers carried her story under bold headlines. One article called her the woman who turned betrayal into empire. Another described her as a voice for the voiceless, a queen who built her throne from ashes. Television programs invited her for interviews, where she spoke openly about resilience, strength, and the importance of women owning their power. She never once mentioned Taye by name. She didn't need to. Her success was proof enough of who truly carried the crown all along. Amahle's face began to appear on magazine covers, not for scandal, but for inspiration. She became a role model, not only for women in Lusaka but across the entire nation. Mothers told their daughters her story. Young girls looked at her and believed that they, too, could rise after being broken. Through it all, Amahle remained grounded. She still carried the same grace that once made her admired, but now it was different. This time, she was admired not for being the perfect wife, but for being a powerful woman in her own right. She had walked through betrayal and come out stronger, turning her scars into strength. And as she stood in her new office, overlooking the city that once whispered about her in pity, Amahle smiled. Those whispers had turned into songs of praise. She had not only survived, she had risen, stronger than ever. Months passed, and Taye's world crumbled piece by piece. The wealth he once flaunted was gone. His business partners had abandoned him, and Naledi had disappeared the moment the money dried up. The man who once walked with pride now lived in shame, his name whispered with pity instead of respect. One afternoon, Amahle found him waiting outside her office. His clothes were worn, his face tired, and his eyes desperate. For the first time in years, he looked small. "Amahle," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Please forgive me. I made a mistake. I lost everything. I need you." She stood tall, her calm presence making his words sound even weaker. She looked at him with steady eyes, eyes that no longer carried pain but wisdom. Her voice was soft, yet it cut deeper than any shout. "The night you plotted against me was the night you buried yourself," she said. "I just handed you the shovel." Taye lowered his head, unable to speak. But Amahle did not linger. She turned and walked away, her steps strong, her head high. She did not look back, not once. His pleas faded into silence behind her. Weeks later, Amahle stood on a grand stage, receiving an award for her leadership and the empire she had built. The hall erupted with applause, cameras flashing as her name was celebrated. Dressed in elegance, she held her trophy high, her smile glowing with triumph. In the shadows at the back of the hall, Taye stood quietly, watching the woman he had tried to destroy rise higher than ever. Regret consumed him, but it was too late. Amahle had already written her victory and left him behind forever.